Well, hello, I'm Josh, and I'm back once again with another great film to tell you about. And as it looks like it's getting near election time again, I thought I'd talk about a rather lesser known film about a presidential race made 60 years ago that's nevertheless still very relevant. That film being Franklin J. Schaffner's 1964 classic, The Best Man. Based on the play by Gore Vidal, The Best Man follows the two frontrunners for the presidential nomination of an unnamed party. One, a more principled politician who believes in the system, while the other, a self proclaimed man of the people who doesn't mind getting his hands dirty. And as that dirt begins to fly, we are given a backstage look at how the evening unfolds for these two candidates, making you wonder the same question posed on the film's poster: does the best man always get to the White House? So as I said, this was directed by Franklin J. Schaffner, who is now well known for directing hits like the original Planet of the Apes, Papillon, Patton, and The Boys from Brazil. But at this point, he was an up-and-comer whose primary experience was in directing televised plays, one of them actually being 12 Angry Men, 2 years before it was adapted into the classic film. But the path from directing TV to feature films was not an unusual one, as plenty of big directors, including Sidney Lumet and John Frankenheimer, also got their start with these plays. And so when the producers were looking for a director to tell Gore Vidal's story, Schaffner was eventually picked. He wasn't the first choice though. Apparently Frank Capra was going to come out of retirement to direct this film originally. And as much as I like Capra's films, I think it was probably best that this didn't work out, as the play is a much more unfiltered look at politics than what people would have been used to seeing in its day. And though Capra did make some classic political films like Mr. Smith Goes to Washington and Meet John Doe, his old Hollywood approach would have likely been a bad fit for this kind of film, and after some arguments over things like tone, writer Gore Vidal eventually convinced United Artists to replace Capra, and sadly he never tried directing again. The film was shot in beautiful black and white by Haskell Wexler, and though it's done pretty straightforward overall, nothing too artsy, there are moments usually out on the floor which are shot in a handheld documentary look, which would go on to be a major part of Wexler's style, particularly with the film he directed himself, Medium Cool, where he famously filmed scenes inside the 1968 Democratic Convention, as well as the riots outside. And this choice was likely influenced by other political films, I think particularly The Manchurian Candidate, which was headed by fellow TV director John Frankenheimer, as that film also has scenes filmed in a similarly realistic way out on the floor. And so what's cool about both of these films is that they were made by people who had a background in television, and so they were able to show the medium in a much more realistic way than many of the older directors before them had done. For instance, you can see gospel singer Mahalia Jackson singing some songs for the attendees, and we are also periodically shown the television broadcast of the convention hosted by Howard K. Smith, who was a real-life news anchor for ABC at the time. And you can actually see him briefly on the TV in Spielberg's Close Encounters of the Third Kind about 15 years later. But most of the film itself is about the behind-the-scenes level of politics and how these people act behind closed doors. We, the audience, are pretty much on Henry Fonda's side from the start, as Cliff Robertson's Joe Cantwell is clearly a radical who quickly engages in mudslinging at Fonda's character William Russell, who in addition to being portrayed as much more level-headed and moderate, is also, as I said, played by Henry Fonda, who has played a noble and heroic president a time or two in his career. But we soon find out that though overall well-meaning, Russell is not nearly as perfect as his image makes him out to be, and when some of Cantwell's dirt starts to stick, Russell has to decide whether or not to use some of his own information he's received back on Cantwell.
You're not going to use that now.
Oh, yes. I'll use anything against you. I can't let you be president.
As he did in the play, Gore Vidal made what I think was a wise choice in making this just a presidential nomination rather than a full-blown election, as this kind of strips away some of the partisan elements and makes this all happen within one unnamed party. This allows for the focus to be less on the actual positions they stand for and more in the scramble for votes that the candidates have to do and the backstabbing that often ensues. And because of this, Vidal was able to have a little more freedom while creating his characters, taking inspiration from both political parties. For instance, Russell is supposed to be based on someone like Adlai Stevenson, while Cantwell was supposed to be more of a Joseph McCarthy, Richard Nixon type. But as good as the writing, directing, and cinematography is, I think what really sells this film is the cast. Henry Fonda is of course perfect as candidate William Russell. As I said, his casting just works right from the start, as we have seen him play these kind of upstanding heroes before, though this time he's shown to have a few flaws which end up coming in conflict with his attempts to keep a pristine image. Meanwhile, Cliff Robertson has no problem being ruthless and abrasive if it means getting ahead, as it has gotten him thus far. Though I do find it interesting that as we see behind closed doors with his wife, played by Edie Adams, Cantwell actually becomes much warmer and kinder. Meanwhile, William Russell, though much nicer and upstanding in public, is shown to have a much colder relationship with his own wife, played by Margaret Leighton, and they are implied to only still be married because divorce could hurt his political career. It's an interesting choice as it subverts our expectations that have initially been set up for these two candidates, but also shows how much of politics on this level is performative. Seeing Cantwell's drastic change of character behind closed doors really makes us question how much of what he says does he truly believe.
Nice thing about you, Joe, is that you can sound like a liberal, but at heart you're an American.
And though Russell is shown to still be overall more sincere, he still has to put on a bit of a front himself to keep up appearances. The incredible part of this revelation, though, is that it is never really stated outright and only comes out through their performances.
I don't understand you.
I know you don't. Because you have no sense of responsibility toward anybody or anything. And that is a tragedy in a man, and it is a disaster in a president.
And along with Fonda and Robertson, you also have Lee Tracy, who gives a wonderful performance as the former President Hochstetter, who both candidates are trying to get backing from. And there's also Ann Sothern as Sue Ellen Gamage, the vice chair of the party who is constantly trying to stir up trouble. Gene Raymond as Joe Cantwell's brother and campaign manager, and even Kevin McCarthy, who has been coming up pretty regular of late, makes another appearance here as Russell's campaign manager, Dick Jensen. In another surprise, Shelley Berman, who is mainly known for his comedy, can be seen here as Sheldon Bascombe, a shady character who tries to capitalize on his time spent in the army with Cantwell by selling some dirt that he has on him.
Joe, don't get mad at me. I mean, it was my duty.
So if you'd like to watch The Best Man, it's a bit tougher to track down than most of the films I talk about on this channel. It's not actually available to rent or buy digitally anywhere, though I have found some uploads on YouTube of varying qualities, so you might check those out. And physically, it's only available on DVD or, I guess, VHS in a relatively cheap looking copy. I mean, the actual film looks good enough for a DVD, so I guess that's what's really important. It's not an overly scratched transfer, and the trailer is actually included, which makes me think that this is the real deal and not just some strange bootleg copy that's floating around. But the printing on the package is just kind of low resolution and cheap looking for a studio release, which really caught me off guard. But regardless, I guess it's the best looking way to watch this film nowadays, and this is definitely a film that's worth watching. So if you want to do that, I guess this is what we're gotta go with nowadays. So for my comment question, I'm wondering, what is your favorite movie about politics? I mean, there are some really classic ones out there like Preston Sturges' The Great McGinty and Frank Capra's Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, as I mentioned before. I mean, since then you've had films like Wag the Dog, Bob Roberts, The Candidate with Robert Redford. I mean, there are so many possibilities out there to choose from, but now's really the time to watch them. So put your favorites in the comment section down below and start discussing. Hit the like button if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe if you want to see some more of these. I'll be back with some great spooky movies for October, so remember to keep watching movies, and I will see you again soon.
This great honor which has fallen to me to put in nomination for President of the United States, that great American and Secretary of State,